I became addicted to sleeping pills.
You know the rules, eh? There's no rules.
There was a time when Jean-Claude Van Damme reigned supreme. His name alone could pack theaters from Brussels to Brooklyn. The muscles from Brussels didn't just deliver roundhouse kicks on screen. He symbolized an entire era of raw, unfiltered action. But then, almost overnight, he vanished. No farewell tour, no public meltdown, no grand finale, just silence. The very studios that once fought for him suddenly wouldn't take his calls. The producers who once hailed him as the next Stallone or Schwarzenegger were now saying his name behind closed doors with disappointment. What happened? Why did one of the biggest action stars in Hollywood lose it all in the blink of an eye? Behind the bulging muscles and high-flying stunts was a storm waiting to erupt. Addiction, erratic behavior, behind-the-scenes drama, and a single shocking incident that became the final nail in his cinematic coffin. Friends walked away. Directors blacklisted him. Even fans started to turn. But now, after years of speculation and whispers in Hollywood's darkest corners, the truth has finally surfaced. And it's more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. This isn't just a story of a man who rose too fast and fell too hard. It's the unraveling of a legend who couldn't outrun his own demons. From box office blockbusters to straight-to-DVD obscurity, this is the brutal truth behind Jean-Claude Van Damme's vanishing act, and the one event that ended it all. What happened behind closed doors that was too scandalous for the press? And why did everyone in Hollywood decide on the same day that they were done with Van Damme? Let's go back to the moment everything changed. Before the fall, there was the rise, a meteoric ascent so fast, even Jean-Claude Van Damme himself could barely keep up. Born and raised in Brussels, Belgium, Van Damme wasn't always the fierce, camera-ready fighter Hollywood would later worship. He was a quiet, sensitive boy, drawn more to ballet and discipline than violence and flash. But behind that elegant poise burned a fire, an obsession with martial arts that consumed his teenage years. He trained relentlessly, karate, kickboxing, Muay Thai, developing a physique and presence that couldn't be ignored. By his early 20s, Van Damme had already become a martial arts champion in Europe. But Europe wasn't big enough. He packed his bags and flew to America, with nothing more than dreams and determination, waiting tables and sleeping in cars while hustling his way into Hollywood's unforgiving machine. It was Bloodsport in 1988 that changed everything. Shot on a shoestring budget and almost left for dead by its studio, the film unexpectedly exploded. Audiences didn't care about the script or the acting. They came for Van Damme, for his mesmerizing splits, his lightning-fast kicks, his burning eyes. In that moment, a new action hero was born. He was different from Stallone's raw brawn or Schwarzenegger's robotic cool. Van Damme was elegance in motion, a ballet dancer who could break bones. Studios noticed. In a span of 6 years, he starred in hits like Kickboxer, Lionheart, Double Impact, and Universal Soldier, earning tens of millions and becoming one of the highest-paid action stars in the world. But as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the shadows creeping behind him. Fame came fast, but control came slower. With each hit film, Van Damme grew more erratic behind the scenes, refusing direction, rewriting scripts, demanding absurd salaries, and worst of all, falling into the grip of a cocaine addiction that would soon consume everything. Hollywood is quick to build idols, but even quicker to crush them when they show weakness. And Van Damme, blinded by ego and trapped by addiction, had no idea that his empire was already crumbling beneath him. This wasn't just the rise of a star, it was the first step toward a devastating collapse. A collapse triggered not by a box office flop, but by a moment so shocking, so destructive, that Hollywood would never look at him the same again. By the early 90s, Jean-Claude Van Damme had it all. Money, fame, fast cars, adoring fans, and the keys to Hollywood's action kingdom. But success didn't heal the inner wounds he carried. While fans saw a charismatic martial artist delivering flying kicks and intense stares, those close to him began noticing a different Van Damme, a man unraveling from the inside out. He was now earning millions per film, but the money brought more than comfort. It brought temptation, pressure, and excess. His on-set behavior became erratic. He would disappear for hours, sometimes days. Directors and producers whispered about his substance abuse and the difficulty of working with him. Rumors swirled that he was blowing through scripts, improvising entire fight scenes, and throwing tantrums when his vision wasn't followed. Cocaine became his escape. At one point, Van Damme admitted to using up to 10 grams a day, a habit that not only derailed his personal life, but put entire productions at risk. Marriages crumbled. Friends distanced themselves. And yet, despite it all, studios kept calling, until they didn't. The incident that finally broke the silence happened on the set of Street Fighter in 1994. A film that should have been his crossover into mainstream stardom. It had a massive budget, international appeal, and Van Damme as the face of it all. But what unfolded behind the scenes was chaos. He was paid $8 million for the role of Colonel Guile, but he was reportedly high for most of the shoot, barely showing up to set on time, if at all, and locking himself in hotel rooms for days. Director Steven D'Souza would later reveal that Van Damme's addiction and behavior were so out of control, the production schedule had to be rewritten constantly just to accommodate his unpredictable absences. One particular outburst, an explosive drug-fueled meltdown, was witnessed by cast and crew and leaked to the studio executives. That was the breaking point. Word spread fast. Studios that once courted Van Damme now saw him as a liability. Insurance companies began refusing to cover his films. He was no longer a sure bet, he was a risk. And just like that, the offers dried up. Hollywood didn't announce it. There was no press release. But behind closed doors, the verdict was unanimous. Van Damme was finished. Not because of a bad movie or a box office bomb, but because he could no longer be trusted. His career didn't end with a bang. It ended with a whispered phone call and a silent blacklisting that would follow him for years. And Jean-Claude Van Damme, once the king of action cinema, was suddenly looking at a future of straight-to-DVD obscurity. After the debacle on Street Fighter and the quiet exile from major studios, Jean-Claude Van Damme was no longer the action titan who could carry a film on muscle and charisma alone. The shift was brutal and merciless. Practically overnight, the multi-million-dollar contracts dried up, and so did the media coverage. He went from gracing the covers of action magazines and appearing on talk shows to being reduced to a footnote in conversations about 90s stars who disappeared. With his reputation in tatters, Van Damme was forced to accept roles in direct-to-video productions just to stay afloat, films with half the budget, half the exposure, and none of the prestige. The Quest, Maximum Risk, and Legionnaire were all attempts at a comeback, but none could reignite the spark. Critics panned the performances, citing his lack of emotional depth and increasingly tired formula. Audiences had moved on to newer, more bankable stars like Keanu Reeves, Will Smith, and Matt Damon. But behind the scenes, Van Damme wasn't just fighting for relevance. He was fighting for his life. The cocaine use had taken its toll. His body aged rapidly, his reflexes dulled, and the once laser-focused fighter became a man struggling with mood swings, depression, and a deep sense of loss. He went through multiple divorces and estranged relationships with his children. The money he had earned so quickly was being burned even faster. In interviews years later, he would admit that he'd hit rock bottom. One of the darkest moments came when even international markets, where he had long remained a reliable draw, began turning their backs on him. The man once considered an international treasure had become a cautionary tale. Jean-Claude attempted several comebacks, hoping his name still had enough pull. But the industry had moved on. Then came a moment of painful clarity. He realized he couldn't keep blaming the studios, the producers, or Hollywood politics. He began to own his downfall. In a rare public admission, he confessed not only to his addictions, but to the ways his ego had destroyed the trust others had placed in him. I was difficult. I was selfish, he said. I didn't know how to handle success. I blew it. That level of honesty was jarring. It wasn't part of the action hero image fans remembered, but it was real. And in that moment, Van Damme stopped being a fading icon and started becoming something else. A man looking for redemption. Still, the damage was done. His name no longer opened doors. His phone no longer rang. And while fans still held on to nostalgia, the Hollywood machine had already replaced him with newer faces and fresher energy. What remained was a legacy stained not by failure on screen, but by implosion behind the scenes. Jean-Claude Van Damme wasn't brought down by box office numbers or a single bad film. He was brought down by himself, by unchecked ego, addiction, and one fateful project that forced Hollywood to turn its back on a man it once adored. And the worst part? He saw it all happening. and couldn't stop it. Though his fall was steep and public, Jean-Claude Van Damme never fully disappeared. Beneath the wreckage of ego, addiction, and exile, there remained a spark, a quiet, burning desire to find meaning beyond the fame he had once clung to. After years in the wilderness of straight-to-video roles, tabloid scandals, and personal turmoil, Van Damme began to rebuild, not his career, but himself. He returned to martial arts, not as a performer, but as a student. He practiced meditation. He embraced therapy. Slowly, the cocaine was replaced with discipline. The arrogance gave way to humility. He began speaking openly about his struggles, appearing in interviews with raw honesty that stunned those who remembered his invincible persona from the 90s. "I was not a good man," he once admitted, eyes welling with emotion. "But I wanted to become one." And while Hollywood didn't exactly come running back with open arms, there were glimmers of appreciation, small, almost reluctant acknowledgments that maybe, just maybe, the muscles from Brussels still had something left to say. In 2008, that chance came with JCVD, an indie film unlike anything Van Damme had ever done. He wasn't the invincible hero. He wasn't even acting like one. He played a version of himself, broken, aging, forgotten. The film was part thriller, part autobiography, and surprisingly brilliant. His 6-minute emotional monologue to the camera, in which he breaks the fourth wall and pours out his regret, left audiences stunned. Critics praised his vulnerability, calling it the best performance of his career. Suddenly, the industry that had once shut him out began to take another look. But this wasn't a grand comeback. There was no blockbuster deal, no return to glory. What followed instead was something more grounded. Small projects, humble roles, and a niche fan base that had never stopped rooting for him. Van Damme embraced this new chapter, not as a star, but as a survivor. He voiced characters in animated films, poked fun at his own legacy in commercials, and kept his private life private. The brash, unpredictable action star had transformed into a reflective, cautious man, one who had lost everything and learned to live without it. Today, Jean-Claude Van Damme lives quietly, far from the Hollywood spotlight that once devoured him. He remains a symbol, not of perfection or invincibility, but of what happens when fame is handled without care. His story is no longer just about action films or iconic splits. It's about the price of ego, the agony of addiction, and the long, painful road to redemption. His career didn't end with a scandal splashed across magazine covers. It ended silently, in the background of a film set, when the industry realized it could no longer trust him. And yet Van Damme didn't fade away bitter. He fought not for stardom but for peace. And in that fight, he may have found something far more meaningful than any blockbuster ever gave him. Because sometimes the real fight isn't on screen. It's within.